So hi all, welcome to our webinar. Today we're going to talk about how to reduce cost and maximize your value by running your Windows workloads on AWS. So presenting today is myself, Ben May, and my colleague Matt Atwater. I am a solutions architect with ClearScale. My background is in systems engineering and management. And at ClearScale, I support both the sales team and client projects. While Matt is also a solutions architect with ClearScale, Matt's background is across a wide array of technologies, and his main focuses are in development and data technologies. So ClearScale is an AWS premier consulting partner. We started in Silicon Valley in 2011 and have completed over 850 projects for over 250 Amazon customers. We have 9 AWS partner competencies, such as migrations, DevOps, nonprofit, and SaaS. Our engineering team holds over 100 AWS certifications. So on today's agenda, we're going to do an overview of what a Windows workload is and how AWS helps lower costs, increases your productivity, and reduces outages. After the presentation, we'll have a short Q&A for any questions. All right, so let's talk about what a Windows workload is. Windows workloads largely consist of supporting Windows users. To do this, we use Windows servers with Windows Server 2019, Windows file systems, and other Windows tools like Active Directory. Windows workloads also consist of server applications. These types of applications take advantage of .NET, Windows containers, and Microsoft SQL Server. So these are some of the challenges that I have run into while managing Windows workloads. First is the high cost of provisioning. Finding a vendor, reviewing the newest systems, and planning for capacity is difficult and time-consuming. And doing all this just to maintain performance as your application develops, but your hardware gets older. You always have reliability issues. Testing your infrastructure's fault tolerance is not easy. And while most companies know what it takes to actually test their fault tolerance, they don't have the proper protocols to actually manage that necessary maintenance. Then last is governance. So we've all used tools like Nmap scanners, which give us unreliable information. So knowing what or who is in your environment can be a daunting task. All right, so why Amazon? Well, Amazon has the migration experience. Amazon has migrated thousands of Windows workloads successfully. They have some of the best reliability in the cloud. They have 76 availability zones, which consist of 175 data centers that span across 24 locations around the world. They have 89 security standards and compliance certs. So if you have HIPAA or PCI DSS, Amazon has the services that support those and the certifications to help you through your audits. They have over 212 services. So as your company grows and uses more services than Amazon, Amazon's constantly growing those services. And then Amazon also just has a giant partner network, if that be tools that use Amazon's products or consulting partners like ClearScale. So we'll talk about the business values and numbers. Many customers are already experiencing the value in AWS. International Data Corporations, IDC, is a premier global provider of market intelligence. They did an analysis of migrating Windows workloads to AWS. The quantifiable benefits were 442 5-year return on investment, 98% less unplanned downtime, 75% more efficient IT infrastructure team, so your systems team could focus on the tasks that provide value for you. With that, you get 56% lower 5-year cost of operations, 37% lower infrastructure costs, with 32% higher gross productivity. That productivity was analyzed from 900 employees using Windows workloads running on AWS. Then you have 31% higher internal customer satisfaction and 26% higher developer productivity using AWS's tools. So although we're talking about the benefits of having Windows workloads in AWS, we first would like to cover how we typically get our workloads onto AWS. There are 6 R's of migrations: rehost, replatform, repurchase, refactor, retire, and retain. But today we'll focus on the three, which are rehost, replatform, and refactor. These three describe ways on moving your workload to the cloud. So first we'll look at rehost. This is a lift and shift. You're essentially taking your VMware on site, taking a snapshot and moving it to the cloud. You do get some benefits though, like Amazon's high availability and very fast network speeds. The second one is usually where we start with customers, which is the replatform. We call this a lift, tinker, and shift. So you're doing essentially the same as a rehost, but you're trying to separate some of the services you may be running on those VMs. So for example, if you're using an SMTP box, maybe you could get rid of that and use Amazon's simple email service. Or if you're managing your own Active Directory, you could use Amazon's directory services. So you could not manage those services and allow Amazon to handle that. And then the last one is refactoring. This is where we try to get all customers, and it provides the most value for a customer. This is where you redesign your complete application and rebuild the architecture for the cloud. Throughout that development, you become what's called cloud native, and you get to use things called serverless. So in Amazon, one of the main serverless products is Lambda, where it's functions as a service. So these are billed by milliseconds. So all of your functions are only paid for when they're in use. These serverless offerings are highly available, and they're managed and used by Amazon. So here's a couple typical use cases we see with Windows workloads. We have migrating your servers to retire tech debt and increase reliability, optimizing SQL Server and Active Directory for performance and resilience, modernizing your .NET applications for faster deployments and cost savings, then the ability to innovate and drive business agility. This is things like once you're in the cloud, you could use cloud native tools like artificial intelligence and machine learning that Amazon provides. So let's talk about some of the benefits of having a Windows workload in AWS. So lowering the cost of your IT infrastructure. We'll be focusing on the first R, which is a rehost. In Amazon, you pay for what you use. For machine instances, which in Amazon we call EC2, you pay hourly. You could shut down your instance and keep the metadata without paying for it to run. You will pay for some of those storage costs, but it's much cheaper than actually running those machines. So this is great if you have a workload that runs only during the week or only during the day. You can shut those down during the weekend or at night and save costs. So forecasting for your peak usage is kind of antiquated in this sense. So instead of paying for your peak usage when you provision your servers, pay for only what you're using now. And by now, it's not what you're using this month or this week. It's what you're using now, today, or this hour. And Amazon's infrastructure is very large. So it allows you to choose the size of machines that you need now. You could choose a machine with 1 CPU and 2 gigs of RAM, or a machine with 32 CPUs and 200 gigs of RAM. So as you grow, your AWS footprint could grow alongside. Doing this, you need to right-size your machines. So you should be using well above 50% of your machine's resources at any given time. If you're using less than that, you're essentially wasting money and energy. So for example, in 2018, TSO Logic, which is a cost of ownership tool, analyzed over 100,000 operating systems. They found that only 16% of the instances were sized appropriately. After doing some analysis, they came out and said that we could reduce costs of up to 36%. Now that's a really good number, and IDC, as I mentioned before, had that number at 37%. So these are real numbers that you could get by migrating to the cloud. These aren't one-off types of numbers. But now that you're in the cloud, you have to worry about you're renting these servers, and you could go over your budget. So cost management is a new challenge, and sometimes it scares away some companies. Well, Amazon's thought about it, and we'll go over managing your spending in Amazon. So one of the best tools they have for managing that is your Cost Explorer. It's a near real-time visibility of your cost and usage. Cost Explorer allows you to filter your view to see things like cost per service, region, usage type. You could even create your own tags on your resources. So for example, you can put a tag for a department, or put a tag for an application, or put a tag for a department and an application. and you could break down those costs in your Cost Explorer to see where you're actually spending money on your infrastructure. Now, I want to make sure you don't go over budget. So AWS Budget allows you to create custom alerts to a spending threshold that you set. So for example, if you budgeted $10,000 this month for your spending, and you are, it's the 15th of the month, and you're at $6,000, you could set it up so Amazon will send you an email to notify you that you are forecasted to be over your budget this month. Now, how do you cut those costs? Well, the right sizing that we talked about before, and Amazon offers a right sizing recommendation where you could actually go into the Cost Explorer, and Cost Explorer will review the existing monitoring tools that are provided on your machines, so you don't have to install any new agents. And they'll provide a recommended instance type and size. So you could see that right in the dashboard, or you could export it to an Excel and then actually work with that and cut your costs by the recommendations that Amazon has. Great, so we're in the cloud now, but what do we do with our licenses? We know that companies buy 100 licenses or big bulks of licenses so that they know when their company grows, they could spin up those servers and be in compliance. Well, with Amazon, they put the license cost directly into that hourly cost. So you're only paying for that license when you use it. But Amazon knows that people still have their licenses that exist, with it be Windows Server or MS SQL or Oracle, and they offer a license manager for that. So with the license manager, you could import the license configs that you have currently, or the policies you have, and you can rent those servers without the license cost that Amazon provides, and then you could assign the license that you have already. So using this license manager, you know that you are in compliance, and you know if you need to purchase more licenses, if that's what you prefer to do. So these are just some of the values you can realize as part of a rehost. Now I'll hand the mic over to Matt, our other solutions architect with ClearScale. Matt will discuss more benefits you could gain when implementing other migration strategies.
Thank you, Ben, and welcome everyone. Please, if you have any questions as we go through the presentation, there should be a chat where you can ask your questions, and when we get to the Q&A section at the end of the webinar, we'll be able to answer those. So just drop in whatever you have whenever you have it. As Ben discussed, the first step for a lot of companies getting into the cloud environment is doing that rehost. The reason that's usually the first step is as you're migrating from an on-site data center into the cloud. Most users don't want to pay for long-term to have two different environments up and running at the same time. So moving to rehost versus some of the other strategies is the quickest way to get up there. Now we're in the cloud. Now we can focus on other strategies within the cloud. So after we go to rehost, usually the next thing we start doing, as Ben said, and a lot of people actually start there instead of the rehost, is the replatforming, that lift, tinker, and shift. And there is a big difference between two, and a lot of cost savings you can make by going to replatforming. And the cost savings you make is really around the efficiency of your IT staff. Let's take, for example, if you have a Microsoft SQL server and you're going into a rehosting environment, what you'd probably end up doing is, setting up an EC2 instance or a couple of them, depending on what you have for fault tolerance and high availability and turnover. Do you have a hot backup, a cold backup, etc. You have to install your SQL server onto these EC2 instances, manage your licenses, do all your configuration of all your performance tuning. If there's a patch that comes out, you have to patch it. If you need to upgrade the version, you have to upgrade the version. If you outgrow the machine, then you have to go do it all over again on a new machine and get rid of the old machine. When we talk about replatforming, we're talking about using managed services, things that AWS is setting up and managing for you. And AWS has a RDS, a relational data system. And with the relational data system, they have a bunch of different databases that will manage for you, one of them being Microsoft SQL Server. And if you went to that replatform standpoint, instead of doing all the steps we just talked about, AWS just handles them for you. You do some basic configuration saying, I think I need this much data from the database. I have this many IOPS, etc. Just really basic stuff. And you can change those on the fly as you move in, and AWS handles it all for you. This gives you that increase in your IT staff efficiency. So utilizing these managed services, it allows you to free up time for your staff, and your staff is focusing on business issues rather than IT issues, uh, thinking strategic versus tactical. And that creates a lot of business value while lowering your cost of what your staff is doing. Going back to some of those IDC studies that Ben was talking about earlier, if you start using managed services and you use them often, you can save up to 75% of have a 75% more efficient IT infrastructure. And if you want to put dollars on it, they found that on average, that per 100 users in your organization, you're saving $43,000 a year. And that's just by going to these managed services and being strategic rather than tactical. So when we talk about AWS Managed Services, they have a lot of services as being talked about. Let's highlight a few of them that are Windows specific or Microsoft specific. A big one is, and you get the same cost savings, is FSX for Windows for the file server. You could be setting up EBS blocks, hooking up to EC2 machines, etc., or use the managed service. Ben already talked about directory service, and I just talked about the SQL Server going through RDS instead. You have Docker images you can put on ECS or EKS, or if you want to get rid of the Windows license and you have the availability to develop in .NET Core, you can use Linux, don't have the licenses, and move to ECS and EKS with those Linux images. Those are just a few examples. All right, so let's talk about, that was really around your IT operations. What about your developers? How do your developers get more productive? This is going to that spot that Ben says everyone wants to land into. That's that refactoring step. We're going more and more cloud native, and I'll talk more about cloud native as we go along. And when we say refactoring, we're not talking about just changing your code, and I update my code to the latest versions of libraries, etc. What we're really talking about is changing your architecture and your design. We're going very modular, trying to use containers. We focus on the business outcomes, use a lot of the cloud technologies, a lot of the cloud native technologies. And usually when you hear people talk about digital transformation, they're really talking about how do we go cloud native? How do we go refactor our app and turn our application to be cloud native? Again, IDC, going to keep quoting the numbers, about 26% higher development productivity when you start going cloud native. And these benefits are, of course, on top of what you got for a rehost and replatform. Now, when we talk about cloud native, I know you've probably heard of a lot of it. It's kind of one of those buzzwords. So when I talk about cloud native, what I'm really talking about is the architecture. The architecture of your application overall. You're using the best breed languages and frameworks. You're doing a lot of serverless and container stuff, using a lot of managed services, and where possible, using cloud native technologies, which tend to be serverless. When you go to design, we start talking about API first design, that we talk about what do we want for our business outcome. We're going very modulars. Everything's just an API that talks to each other, and stringing together APIs is how you get a business process through. So let's talk about our APIs and develop our APIs and how they communicate first, then put the code behind them to make that happen. As I said, very modular, very loosely coupled. And because when we're talking about containers, when we're talking about the web of cloud technologies, we want elasticity. We want to have a container if we have a microservice running, and that microservice can expand as you have more and more users into your app and shrink back down as users go away. We don't generally want these stateless, because if you have stateful sessions, you could be binding up these instances of these applications, and you don't get the elasticity you really want. So by being stateless, you have the complete elasticity, and you don't run into issues if a container disappears for whatever reason. Other big part about being cloud native in my mind is automation. With automations, you start leveraging your infrastructure as your code. And again, we're trying to, when we're talking about going serverless, we're talking about containers, being elastic, all this stuff has to do, let's keep hands off a keyboard, no fat fingering. Let's make things ever repeatable and automate it as much as possible. So we're taking care of these things behind, and we're not spending our IT staff time just trying to, let's spin up another container, let's bring it back down. Or as we do that, we're doing it by hand, and it takes time instead of hitting a button because we have it as code, and it just runs automatically, and it does the same thing over and over again. So that's your DevOps principles, or DevOpsSec, however you want to say it. And I know there's a lot of little nuances between the two we're not going to go into. Your CI/CD process and how you deploy it. Automation is a big part of being cloud native. By doing these things, your applications become very highly responsive, and they're very real time or very near real time when your users are accessing them. A lot of low latency. One of my favorite things, I've worked with some clients before, retails and restaurant type businesses, where customers walk in or are near using geolocation or whatever, because they're doing real time, is very responsive. They can say, here's a coupon, or here's a special, or multiple different things to get that customer 360 personalization, which is something that when you think cloud native, when you think of highly responsive apps, is what people are moving towards, which is why Ben says this is the goal of everyone. Because this is about moving your Windows workloads into the AWS, I want to take a minute to talk about some of the tools that are available. I've been in this business for a while. When I first started moving stuff to the cloud, it seems like a lot of the tools were either Java or Python, and there wasn't a whole lot of options. AWS has spent a lot of time working with Microsoft tools, making them more and more native to the AWS services. And because of that, things like AWS Land, they can do .NET Core 2.1 and 3.1 and build your serverless applications that way. They have SDKs and toolkits for Visual Studio Code. They tie into PowerShell, et cetera. So you now doing things for your users that are used to working in Windows, working with .NET. Moving to the cloud is not, I have to learn a whole new language, a whole new way of doing things. I'm able to use the knowledge and skill set that I've already developed within my company and do that moving to the cloud without a big dynamic shift. All right, so that's getting into the cloud. I do want to talk about a couple of other things just real quick. Things that I've heard and arguments that I've had talking to customers about what do you want to do? What are some of your best practices? What are some of your concerns about moving to the cloud? And the first thing on everybody's mind is security. It used to be when you went to the cloud, can't go to the cloud, cloud is not secure. We got to be a lot more secure to that. But that's really not the case anymore. As Ben said, AWS supports 89 security standards and a bunch of compliances and governance for a bunch of different things across the board. Matter of fact, if you read the trade rags and everything, you'll often hear people quoting, moving to the cloud is more secure than being in your local data center, because the various cloud vendors have more expertise, more people working on it, and more things going around security than most companies, except for really huge ones, have in their individual systems. So moving to the cloud, you just have the expertise out there that you don't have in-house. And when we talk about security and we talk about the compliance and certifications and standards, the other thing we have to talk about is governance, because it's nice to say I'm secure. How do I prove I'm secure? How do I say I'm compliant with HIPAA or something? How do I prove I'm compliant with HIPAA? That's where the governance comes in place. How do you audit it and prove to your auditors that it happens? And that's a big part of your security from a enterprise level thought pattern. I've already talked about infrastructure code, and I add this to security, and I also add this into reducing outages, because if you have infrastructure as code, that gives you that governance where you check in your code, you check it into whatever repository system you're using. So you're able to track historical changes, and it is auditable, so you hit that governance. And by not doing things by hand and being able to fat finger it, you're a lot more consistent across the deployments and less likely to have outages just because of the hand to keyboard issue. Other parts of reducing outages, I think by now everybody knows that the cloud is built for Redundancy, AWS specifically, if you heard the numbers that Ben talked about, they have multiple availability zones of multiple data centers across 24 different regions all around the globe. It's all built for redundancy. The managed services and the serverless services they have in AWS takes advantage of this. So if you don't have those single points of failure in any of your managed services, you don't have a single point of failure in Lambda, Dynamo, Aurora, etc. And using this redundancy to actually help lower your cost. Now, very few applications go completely serverless or completely managed service. There's usually things you have to do from an architecture standpoint, but how are you going to design your system? So when you design your system, you do your architecture, you got to make sure you're taking into account, what are my availability zones, what regions are going to put in, how do I fail over, and use this redundancy so if you don't have any problems. Once you do that, you're reducing your outages drastically based upon what you could do in a single data center that you yourself own. Another best practice, and I hate to say it, I've worked at companies before, they have their big push out into production where they didn't have proper monitoring or learning or any type of dashboards to see what's going on. They didn't have a good knock system set up. So that's one of the big best practices, and AWS has these tools to be able to do this. And you want to make sure you can visualize your system, that you can track your metrics, both real-time and historical. And it's important to be able to do once. Usually if you're in the cloud, especially you're doing containers, the cows, we destroy them, we put a new one up. So if you have a problem, you want to get back up and running as soon as possible, fix the problem, then go back and do your RCA, your root cause analysis. And that's why you need the historical. Of course, in real time, you want to be proactive. You want to get alerts. You want to have that monitoring that says, hey, my disk is 70% full. Let's go do something about it before it's completely full and my system goes down. Also, with seeing what's going on both historically and happening now, I can do some projections and, is business going up? Is my disk usage going up? Is my CPU usage? Am I using more and more containers? Maybe because I think that I see this upwards trend that I need to allocate more resources so I don't go down, I don't have slowness with the customer. It's about being proactive instead of reactive. Let's prevent problems, not wait till we have a problem and then resolve the problems. So you have a good monitoring, alerting, and dashboard that helps reduce your outages. Another study, 31% increase in internal customer satisfaction by doing this, by having these numbers and knowing what's going on. So that's pretty much it from the pure, here's what we think about moving to the cloud. To kind of sum up, I want to talk about the fact that you want to pay for what you use. A big difference from having your own data center. We don't go to, as Ben said, we don't project to what's our peak load. Let's use what we use when we need it, and we save money there. And we right size, and we use elasticity to grow and shrink, and we start doing cost savings from that standpoint. From your IT staff perspective, if you start using managed services, or using serverless, you're not wasting your time from your IT staff, and they're becoming more and more efficient working on the business needs that you have instead of just doing the tactical stuff. This boosts productivities of your staff. Some of the numbers that we get from IDC is 442% 5-year return on investment moving to the cloud. 56% lower 5-year cost of operations by moving to the cloud and using these tools. 37% lower infrastructure costs by moving to the cloud and using these tools. And again, numbers may vary. It depends on how far. If you're just doing a quick rehost, you don't get some of those operational efficiencies versus going to your replatforming, which doesn't give you the developer proficiency if you start going cloud native. So miles may vary. So I want to turn this over now to Ben, and he's going to talk about a use case of a customer that we moved to Microsoft Workloads to AWS and the benefits they gain.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so I'd like to cover a use case of one of our customers and a few offerings that ClearScale and Amazon have to help with your migration process. So I'm covering a customer called SFMatch. SFMatch is a residency and fellowship matching service. They've been doing this for over 40 years, so they've had a few iterations of their application. Some of their challenges that they have are seasonal traffic spikes. Their system is a matching system, and so they have application registration dates and result dates. These dates are when most of their customers are on the site. The rest of the year, it's very limited. So I would say it's about 20 days out of the year that they have peak traffic, and the rest of the year it's very small. So planning for this peak traffic provided, or gave them some errors and site stability issues because it wasn't always perfect science. With that was inflated costs. Running on site, you had to have on-site support. You had to have someone physically come out if there was issues, and it became an issue. Looking at cost, comparing it to the cloud. Then they didn't have scalability. They had to do actual hardware refreshes if they needed more hardware to scale up or to get more clients on their system. So it became very difficult for them to scale. So in 2016, they were going through a hardware refresh cycle, and they came to AWS and ClearScale, and they asked, what does it look like if we move to Amazon? So we assessed what they had currently, and we started designing for what it would look like if we did move it to Amazon. ClearScale and SFMatch, we decided we're going to do a replatform for them, and we put their system in two availability zones or multiple availability zones behind a single load balancer. So now they don't have any outages from one data center going down, or if a piece of hardware were to go down, we could rely on the other availability zone to maintain the site users. We decoupled the file system from the application. So this allows us to scale the application horizontally and without having to adjust or change anything in the file systems. And then we migrated the self-hosted MS SQL to Amazon's managed relational database service. That's also in multi-AZ, and Amazon manages all of that. They manage the security patching. They manage the failovers if there's any hardware outages. So we basically just connect with a connection string, and we put our data in there. We don't have to worry about too much. And then last, we have CloudFormation, which is infrastructure as code provided by AWS. And what this allows us to do, along with our continuous integration, continuous delivery that we implemented, allows us to have basically our everything set as code. So we could spin up multiple environments and keep consistency across the development, UAT, and production environment. So this really helps with reliability and bug fixing. So some of the benefits that they really got from that were the lower cost of IT infrastructure. So now that we're able to scale, we could only pay for what we're using. Before they had to pay for peak, but now we have to pay for only what we're using that day. We'll scale the day before, and we'll scale up multiple times in order to handle the load. And the customer doesn't even notice that, or SFMatch's customer doesn't recognize that. And it's great because there's no outages at that point. It expanded the development agility. So using this CI/CD pipeline, we've went from hours deployments to minutes or tens of minutes, which is great for us. So now we could put out more of quicker hot fixes, and we could deploy things with less downtime. And then we have reduced outages. As I mentioned before, we're in multiple availability zones. So we have reduced outages for outages that would be unplanned outages and planned outages now because all of that is redundant. And then we have service elasticity. This one we drive a lot on because really being able to pay for what you're using and to be able to scale up when more customers come to the site is great. So SFMatch really enjoyed this. They got a lot of benefits out of this, as you could tell, and they liked working with ClearScale. So in 2018, they came back and they said, hey, we want to look at getting this more cloud native and start taking advantage of some of those Amazon offerings. And so we said, okay, let's do a full refactor and let's start the design. So we assessed what we had and we started a design. So we decided on the front end will be JavaScript. And this will be hosted in Amazon's S3, which is their object storage, and CloudFront, which is Amazon's content delivery network. And so now this is all serverless. So our front end will scale almost infinitely, and we don't have to worry about delivering to certain locations around the world. This gets pushed out everywhere. Our backend is .NET Core, And so we were able to use .NET Core within Amazon. And like what Matt said earlier, using these services within Amazon, Amazon's now supporting more Windows workloads. We were able to actually bring our old .NET ASP team over to actually start develop the .NET Core with us. So we didn't have to switch anything. We had a lot of good knowledge there. It was really beneficial to the customer, and it played off very well. And then now this is .NET Core. It's hosted in Linux, so we don't have to pay for that Windows license. So we cut out that cost of the Windows license. We're hosting this in Elastic Container Services with Fargate. So now it's managed completely by Amazon. We just give them a file that says this is what you should run, and Amazon runs it and provides us with a connection string. So it's great. We don't have to worry about scaling or worry about where the application is sitting. Amazon manages that for us. The backend we changed from MS SQL to Aurora Serverless. This was pretty new when we started looking at this in 2018, but it's matured a lot and it's really good. This is running with Postgres. And so serverless Aurora allows us to scale horizontally and vertically on our database without us actually changing anything or without any downtime or failovers in a database. Our object storage is in S3 also. And then we are now able to take advantage of some of those business values like we mentioned earlier, like artificial intelligence and machine learning. One example is Amazon TextRact. We're using Amazon TextRact with SFMatch to review the applicant's documents. So before, every document that came onto the site, which is tens of thousands a year, had to be reviewed and audited by a person. Now Amazon's AI does that for us. So it's a really great tool for them. The benefits they got were lowering the cost of ownership even further. Now with serverless, they're literally paying for exactly what they're using. Using Fargate or the container service, they're paying for only the gigabytes of RAM that the application is using instead of the underlying operating system. So it's really good. The serverless development is fantastic. We have testing environments and demo environments that don't cost anything extra. All of these could be run serverless, so we could spin up quickly another environment and just show them a feature branch, and they could see what it is and how good it is. That agility really goes into our whole development pipeline now. So now we could do what's called canary deployments, where we could release a new feature and deploy it to only 10% of the user base. So we could say, does this work out well? Did we get good results from this 10%? If we did, then deploy it to the rest. And then we have rolling hotfixes with Amazon S3, which is great. We could easily deploy hotfixes and roll them back if we need to. With the AWS serverless offerings, we have near zero outages. Amazon manages all of that, does all security updates, and make sure that everything is constantly running and scaling. And then the extreme elasticity, I really go back to this with the Aurora serverless because it blows my mind that our database, our relational database, is scaling vertically. For example, we had a test we did where we went from 0 requests to 20,000 requests and over 10 minutes, and it scaled multiple times. And with that, we didn't have any downtime or any outages with the users. And so we were able to go from 0 users essentially to tens of thousands within minutes without doing anything. So it's great. And then the increased operational efficiency. We mentioned that TextRact AI. That's just one of the examples, but just with that one, they would have to hire a team of people to manage and look at all those documents. Now AI triggers only the ones that have major issues. And then now they could review those issues. And so they're only auditing and looking at a fraction, a very, very, very small portion of what they were looking at before. So now their employees are focusing on things that provide them value instead of the tedious tasks. Great. So I'll take a look at some of the offerings and client funding programs that are available at ClearScale. We have a couple Windows modernization offerings. The first is an assessment where we review your infrastructure and give you a cloud migration plan and show you the future expense in Amazon. The second is a design. This takes about 3 weeks. You get a design and actual architectural diagram of what you're going to look like and how to get into Amazon. And then the third is refactoring. So this is 6 weeks, about 500 hours. And we'll take one of your applications and take advantage of some cloud native technologies and migrate them to Amazon and enable any security and monitoring guardrails, and then give you a playbook so that your team could continue to manage this system. SFMatch actually took advantage of assessment designs, and then we did a replatform. And then we do an assessment design again into a refactoring. So it's really beneficial for them. Now, some of the AWS partner funding programs are exclusive to Premier partners. ClearScale is an AWS Premier partner, so we're able to take advantage of these. We have optimization and license assessment. We have Windows Rapid Migration program. We have modernization program where we can do something similar to the offering before. And map integration. So this is where if you have a very large migration, we can assess your migration and line up everything that you need to be for any stakeholders in your company or execs, and down to what machines actually need to be migrated, and see and make sure you're ready to migrate. So these are things that Amazon provides funding to the customer to lower that cost of the project, to ensure the success also is why we follow these. Great. So let's go over some questions. I saw that there was a few posted in the Q&A. So the first one is, what is the best criteria to choose a rehost, replatform, re-architecture?
I can get that if you want, Ben. I can give you the standard architect answer. It depends. But the reality is it's depending on your business goals. And this is oversimplification, but take, for instance, if your business goal is, I want to get out of my data center and close my data center as soon as possible, and time is the essence, that's a rehost. Let's get everything up, get it up to cloud, close down the data center. If on the other hand, my business goal is I really need to redesign my application. It's a monolithic application, and we need to get cloud native. We need to be a lot more faster, do the 3 V's of big data, all that stuff. That's a re-architecture, because that's what your business goal is. If your business goal is, I want to lower my IT operation costs and I want to lower IT staff, well, that might be a replatform where we can move some of the stuff up there. The reality is, or at least ideally in my mind, is you're doing all three, and you're doing all three at the same time. Because what's nice is not do this big bang where we're going to do our whole data center, everything all at once. Is we start moving by application into the cloud. And as you look at each application, what makes the most sense? Again, thinking about your business goals. So I'll go back to, it depends. Good answer for any architecture question. Ben, anything to add to that?
No, that was great. Thank you. We do have another. It's how do we assess and design multi-cloud migration? So I'll answer that one. And we typically don't lean into multi-cloud migrations because the cloud native options there are typically limited. So you're only as strong as your weakest link in the chain. So if one of your cloud offerings don't offer a service, then you can't use that service and you have to wait. So now you're waiting for both of your cloud providers to provide that service. So you could do things like rehost and replatform and take advantage of some of those. But again, you're making it a little more difficult for yourself. And so we usually, we are invested in Amazon ourselves as a company, and we align with Amazon and what they offer. And so we prefer them, but other companies like to do across multiple cloud also. So we do implement that, but typically you're limiting yourself. So unless you have a very specific use case, we usually like having a customer choose one cloud or the other. Okay, so we have another question: is there any extra cost to get compliance certs from AWS?
I'll go ahead and take that. The compliance cert question is kind of a misnomer. When you go to AWS, they have services, and each service can be certified for A, B, or C compliance, HIPAA, PCI, etc. And you can go down to AWS, you can download, here's how it's been certified, and get all this information from an audit standpoint. And there's no cost involved with that. But when you really think about it, if I want to be HIPAA compliant, or if I want to be compliant with any type of that governance, it's also how you deploy it and set up your infrastructure. I can go and have an application that I'm building, and I'm using 5, 6, 7 services that are Microsoft HIPAA compliant. that doesn't make my application HIPAA compliant because I still have to do other things. For example, all those applications have to be in their own network segment. I can't have any app or anything touching it that is non-HIPAA compliant, or the whole thing is non-HIPAA compliant. And there's a bunch of best practices in how to do this stuff written up in blogs and other things on AWS. So it's not just downloading the certificate and saying I'm now compliant. It's also in how you use it and being able to prove you're using it in the right way. Did I miss anything there, Ben?
No, that sounds good. Thank you. And then we have one last one here is, does ClearScale have an offering for migrations package? And we don't have an offering specifically for a migration package. What I showed here, we do have like a refactor, which offers a migration in it. But if you're looking for a replatform or rehost, we do have an assessment, and we offer a free assessment where you can look at. We'll take a look and kind of guide you in the right direction. So if you need to just do a normal migration, we would usually assess and see what's going on, and then make that decision after some sort of assessment. So if you want to take advantage of that, you could reach out, and we could take a look and try to help you and get you in the right direction. All right. I think that's all time we really have for questions. So thanks all for joining us here. You could download an ebook we have on modernizing and migrating Windows workloads with AWS. It's on our website. You could just go to clearscale.net to get that, or clearscale.com to get that. And if you want to reach out to us, you could reach out to sales@clearscale.net or just give us a call. Thanks all for joining, and let us know if there's anything you need.